they had like given me this little room to set up all my gear, and I just had all the frames sitting out, and I'm just like slowly sitting there watching. And then the stress is starting to build because I'm like, I'm probably never going to get an opportunity to shoot here again. Who knows if he'll perform here again or another artist. Like, this was probably the only time I'm ever going to get this opportunity. And I'm sitting there just watching these frames develop. And, like, a lot of them weren't good. Like, a lot of them were really bad.
What is up, guys? My name is Logan Tremellin, and this is the Defying Odds podcast. Today I have a friend of mine on, Tyler Babin. Tyler grew up in a small town in Florida. He quickly fell in love with the creative process. He landed an internship at VaynerMedia with Gary Vee. Then he was supported by Adobe to go full-time on himself. And now he's a video producer for Hasan Minhaj, one of the largest comedians in the world. And they just produced a Netflix piece together. Tyler, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks, man.
Of course.
It's been a while. We were just talking like so you said that it was Instagram DMs. I don't totally remember how we actually met, though.
I think I just started just DMing you,
Okay.
just like replying to your stories or something. I meet a lot of people that way. But
then we met, though, in real life.
We met in person. We just shot together a few times.
That's cool.
Yeah. Instagram DMs.
It feels like that was just an eternity ago.
It was like 3-4 years ago.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's get into it. Talk about a little bit about your past and what about like photography and video, because that's all you do now. It's your entire life.
Yeah.
What about photography and video attracted you, and how'd you get into it?
Yeah. It wasn't intentional. I was actually, when I was growing up, was really into magic and skateboarding. Those were like my two passions. Wasn't particularly good at either of them. So I kind of became the person in my friend group that just filmed everything. So I would run around with my friends skateboarding, would film them, edit together little montages. Then I went through this period where I was really into like, it was called flourishing, but it's just like fancy shuffling with cards. So I would lock myself away in my room, edit all day long, film different videos. And at some point, it just became way more interesting, the actual production side of it. I liked filming, I liked editing, I liked being able to control story and make things seem really grand. And so that was kind of the natural pull into photo and video. And then it went through a lot of different phases. I decided at one point I wanted to be a fashion photographer. So I would just shoot portraits of like my friends and like actors and actresses in the city that I was living in. And yeah, I just sort of never looked back. It was always had a camera around, always was taking pictures and trying to come up with some sort of interesting story. And then, yeah, like you said, I lived in Tallahassee, Florida. Its only claim to fame is that it's the headquarters of Sabre from The Office. Don't know why they picked Tallahassee. Also, the depiction of Tallahassee in the show is not accurate whatsoever. But that was this town where no one really knew what to do with me. There was no one that was similar, like interested in the similar things that I was. So always just felt sort of like the outcast. And in my early 20s, after finishing high school and leaving college, I was like, I have to get out of here. I have to go find something that is closely related to what I want to do. And so I just started applying to every internship I could find. Vayner was the only one that called me back and gave me a shot because I had no college degree to show for myself. And then, yeah, the rest is history.
This podcast is sponsored by macromerch.com. Macromerch.com is a simple and easy way to order custom printed t-shirts and products day or night at your convenience. Do you own a business? Do you have an event coming up? Are you involved in an organization or play a sport and need shirts? Look no further. Head over to macromerch.com to browse and select your desired apparel, brand, style, and color. Next, upload your logo, pick your sizes and quantities, use code DEFY at checkout for 10% off your order and free shipping. That's DEFY at checkout for 10% off. So you got a job at Vayner because you were just dedicated to the creative process and you wanted, obviously New York City just appealed to you because that's what you were getting into. You answered my one question. Why did you feel pulled to an internship at NYC? So what did you learn when working with Gary? Like, what did you do when you were with him? How long were you working there? And like, you went from just a kid from Florida to actually working in advertising for Gary Vee.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's funny that to backtrack slightly, there is this company called Creative Live based in Seattle. And they put together like creative education. And it was founded by this guy, Chase Jarvis, who he's kind of become a friend now, but he was sort of my biggest influence getting into photography. And so they would put on these like live workshops over the course of like 2 or 3 days, and you could apply to go and actually be in person during the workshop. And so when I was 18, you had to be 18. So the day I turned 18, I started applying to go to these workshops. And finally I got invited to one by this fashion photographer named Matthew Jordan Smith. So 18, I leave Tallahassee, I fly to Seattle. It was like first time traveling by myself, and did this 3-day workshop all about commercial fashion photography. And at the end of it, he was like, you have to go to New York. And I was like, okay. And I'd been to New York once on like a school trip. But he's like, you have to go to New York and you have to start like assisting. And I said, okay. So I went home and started to figure out like what that even was. It took a few years. That was 18. I didn't move to New York till I was 21. It took a few years to actually figure out how to logistically make it happen.
Yeah.
But New York, for me, it just, as you start doing your research, New York feels like the place that all the best artists in the world go to like prove themselves or figure out if you can make it. The saying of if you can make it here, you can make it anywhere pretty much holds true. And so when I started applying to things, I was a fan of Gary, but I would have taken anything. I was not like, romantic or picky.
Yeah.
I was like, someone give me a job to justify making this jump. And so it was really exciting that Gary was or VaynerMedia at least, because I didn't start on Gary's team right away. Yeah. I just got a graphic design internship where all I would do is go into the office every day. I wanted to be the first one in, last one out. So I'd show up at like 6 a.m. before anyone else was there. I didn't even have an ID badge to get into the building at that time. So like I had to every day walk up to the security guard and like sign in. I'd go in first thing, and basically for like 12 hours, I would just resize Instagram photos. And so I was working on this alcohol brand, so I would resize the photo, and then just at the bottom corner, I'd put like, please enjoy responsibly.
Yeah.
And ship it. And I just did that all day long. And then I knew that I needed to stand out in unique ways. I'm very aware that there's a million people that want to be in the space you're in. So you have to be very weird and abstract in like how you approach opportunities. And so that's why I was always going in first one in, last one out. I wanted people to see me there. And then because I was a photographer and I wasn't getting a lot of opportunities, I just started going and looking at people's calendars to see when photo shoots were happening. So like I would just, in GCal, I would search different people's calendars that I knew worked on like in the photo department and were in production. And I just started showing up uninvited. So I would I knew where the studio was going to be because it was on the calendar. I'd go knock on the door, be like, can I just float around? And then I would basically be a production assistant on set. I'd be like, yo, I can get this. I would like hover over the director or the photographer and like, just observe, but also like if there was an opportunity to insert myself, I would. And so I was starting to, just as an intern, make a little bit of a name for myself. And there was like, people were aware of me being around. And then basically just at a unique time period where Vayner was going through a lot of restructuring, there was a freeze on hiring creatives. There was this new, chief creative officer that had come in, and he was like, we're just going to press pause on bringing on new creatives for a while. And that was 2 weeks before my internship ended. And so I get this email one day, and they're just like, yeah, sorry, we don't have space for you. Next Friday is going to be your last day. And so this all kind of leads to this like famous like Uber ride that Gary and I had, where I emailed him and asked him for a meeting, which turned into essentially a 30-day extension working on his team. And then within a week, he had offered me a job. And then the time on Gary's team was about 3 years, more or less, even though I worked on Gary's team, but he would sort of loan me out to different projects a lot of times. So I ended up directing this campaign for K-Swiss when he was doing a collaboration with them. And then whenever he started Empathy Wines, I went and did creative direction there. And so I would always kind of like bounce around a little bit. And because of that, there's no structure to what I did while I was there. If people are like, what was a normal day like? It's really tough to say, because one day I would be going to shoot a project for a VaynerMedia client, and then he would text me at 10 p.m. and say, hey, can you design a book cover for Crushing It? And I said, sure. And then like that was the next week of work. And it was always just bouncing around into these different spots. But I think that the biggest, I guess, takeaway is him encouraging people to spend your 20s testing a lot of things. And I really, really took that to heart, because he was always just like, you can literally screw up everything for 10 years and then still come out on the other side and win. And so that influenced so much of my decision making. It's why I left. It's why I took the opportunity with Adobe, even though people were always like, that was a dream job, why'd you quit it? And I was like, I'm just following exactly what this dude's telling me to do, which is go try a bunch of shit for the next 10 years. And that way I'll be able to figure out what I actually want to do whenever I start getting older.
Yeah, and that was right around the time we met, is when you were leaving Vayner. I think like the first time we hung out, I was like, so how's Vayner? And you're like, actually, I'm leaving. I'm like, what?
Yeah.
So take me into your deal with Adobe. Like Adobe gave you the support to do full-time YouTube, which is something that obviously appealed to you at the time, and leave Vayner and do that. What made you make the decision and how'd it go?
So I had been working at Vayner for a few years and was just kind of fried on like client work and the type of content production we were doing there. I totally respect everything they do and it has a place, but I was just approaching this sort of phase of like, I gotta do something else. And so I went to India with a group of my friends for a wedding. And the whole time I was there, I did like a daily vlog series. I had no real like purpose of doing it, but my friends and I, we were in India for 2 weeks and we were like, let's just go do something.
Yeah.
And I remember I was having so much more fun on that trip, just filming my life and making, you know, these fun, dumb videos with my friends than what I was having in New York at work. So I, at some point, looked over to a friend of mine that was on the trip and I was like, I feel like there's gotta be a way where I can just get a brand to pay for my life for a year so I can like test this out. And then call it law of attraction or whatever. Within a couple days, I ended up getting served this ad for the creative residency, which, as you said, is this opportunity from Adobe to have a job through Adobe, but you get to utilize that year just sort of exploring creatively what you want to do. And it's really sort of meant to be this launching pad for artists to like figure out what their life is supposed to be. And so got to leave Vayner and go into that. And then that gave me a year of both making work for myself, got to start some series, got to do YouTube full time. And then also it gave me this really cool relationship with Adobe where I got to go to all the Adobe events. I got to go speak on behalf of Adobe and sort of have some say in the products. So getting to work with like the photo team and the video team and have influence on what was being made there. It was really cool. And it was a really, I think, a very critical time for it to happen, because if I hadn't had gotten served that ad, I probably would have just stayed at Vayner for a while and could have potentially like burnt out way worse.
Yeah.
And who knows what path that would have led down, but getting that year to just like test a lot of things was really valuable. And also it turned into being able to, at the end of that year with Adobe, it was actually pretty terrible timing. So my residency with Adobe ended in May of 2020, and I was living in Manhattan, so we were just at like peak pandemic mode. But luckily because of all the work I had done, essentially had this long list of brands and clients that wanted to work with me. And so I was able to transition out of Adobe into proper like full-time YouTube, which I did for another year and hated it.
Really?
Yeah, really, really didn't like it. It's not for me. And that's sort of what led to me taking the opportunity to work with Hassan.
Yeah, so what didn't you like about it?
I think if maybe it would have happened at a different time in the world, I would have liked it more. Right. But because a lot of the projects I had been doing were travel focused and like documentary focused, I couldn't travel, couldn't be around people. And so, but I had all these brands that were like, yo, we need you to make videos. So it resulted in me just making like tutorials and these random videos at home that were just not me at all. And they weren't pushing me creatively. It wasn't moving the needle forward.
Yeah. I
was just churning shit out to make cash, right?
Yeah.
And that in turn made me hate everything I had been working so hard to do, because it just felt like it was all meaningless, you know?
Yeah.
And it didn't have a purpose, and it wasn't pushing me creatively. I was just like, how do I shoot a video today, edit it tomorrow, post it the next day?
Yeah.
And so that sort of showed me that as much as I never want to stop making stuff for myself, I always want to pursue personal projects. I have a long list of things that are always being worked on and things I want to work on in the future. I like having essentially projects from other people that I can sink my teeth into and then like sort of shift back and forth between all those things.
Yeah.
Because I also, whenever you're when you're doing YouTube full time, at least for me, it cut out so many opportunities that came with working with other people and collaborating more. You know, you have to be like a special person, I think, to like lock yourself in the room and just like churn out tutorials every day and feel fulfilled from that. And for me, that just wasn't a fulfilling style of work.
Yeah. So what do you like more, creating for other people? I know you said you like doing both of them, but do you like creating for other people more or for yourself more?
I wish I had a better answer other than it's just both, because doing both, being kind of like the creative behind personalities is cool. It allows me to experiment, pursue stories in a different way. But as I'm always doing that, it's always inspiring ideas that I want to do for myself. And so being able to shift gears and say, okay, I'm going to take a week off of this and work on this for a week. I get to do that. And then all of a sudden there will be another cool opportunity over here. It's sort of these like two sides of the coin. So I just love both, and they both feed me differently, you know?
Yeah.
So I don't think I'll ever go back to just doing one or the other.
Yeah.
It'll always be kind of split down the middle.
Yeah, I understand that answer, because that's what I do. You know, when I lived here in New York City for a few months, I was just making videos for myself, and then I got into action sports videos, so then I was only making videos for other people, and now I do the same thing where I'm building my own brand, building this podcast, posting a lot on social, doing some YouTube videos, but then also have, you know, a long client list of people that we work with all the time. And there's really, I just like both of them.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, so I think the tough thing is there's so much pressure to make a decision on what you're going to do, you know? And it's like life is long.
Yeah.
You can do all the things and
Yeah.
it'll all be okay.
That's one thing just from listening to Gary's content that I take to heart a lot. It's like, like you said, I'm 24 years old now. I can mess up every single decision possible for the next 10 years and still be okay. But I am very fast to change my mind, and I can change it a lot. And I don't take it to heart at all, where like people around me, people who are close to me, they'll be like, you just made this decision 2 days ago that we weren't going to this event. Why are we doing it now? I'm like, I changed my mind. And I see that as a strength.
Totally.
You know?
Totally.
So let's go into your story with Hassan. How do you meet him?
We met, so his first Netflix special, Homecoming King, came out in 2017, and as part of the press tour, he came on the Ask Gary Vee show. I had no idea who he was whenever he came on, but I remember a lot of people were really excited about it, and that was a pretty regular thing for like cool people to be coming through. And so I went in and filmed the video, and he knew me, which was really weird because I didn't know him, and he was like, yo, you're always in the videos and you always are just like getting the shit kicked out of you. Because I would purposefully always edit myself to look like a goofball in Daily V and stuff. It was just more fun. And so he was just like, I remember in the recording of the podcast, he was like, just make yourself win once. Just, he's like, you control the edit. Just do that, you know? And then there was a few other times where he had come through the office a few times and would always like say what's up, dap me up and things like that. And then, you know, he went off and did his Netflix show Patriot Act, and during like pandemic times, I became a big fan of that show. So I watched all of that show and was always just kind of like aware of him. And then one day just got this sort of random text message of an old colleague, Mike Boyd, who like runs music relationships for Gary, texted me and he's like, hey, like linking you on this thread with Hassan. And then he called me, we started chatting. I wasn't even living in New York anymore. I had moved to the West Coast. And we started just chatting about ideas that he had. And I was also sort of, as I mentioned, I was at this point where I was still doing YouTube full time, but I was really starting to hate it. And it was sort of just miserable. And so I remember he called and he was like, I'm going on tour. What are you up to? And I was like, I'll move back next week. I was like, let's go. It was pretty much immediate. And so I ended up flying back to New York, met with him in person. We chatted a little bit and then flew home, broke my lease on the West Coast, sold everything I had bought, and drove back like the next week. And then, pretty much immediately went out on tour. And over that year, which, you know, it sort of started as I was just going to be creating content for his brand and documenting tour, and it wasn't going to be too far off what I had done for many years with Gary. And then, you know, Hassan ended up starting a production company called 186K. So I function as chief digital officer of that company. And then we ended up selling a movie to Amazon in the sort of middle of tour. So we sold an Amazon original, which is going to be like a proper feature-length film. And so, we were on tour. We were shooting a lot of stuff. I would get sort of pulled out of these different projects, work on this Amazon original, and then started doing some like creative direction on the actual special, helping do like mock-ups and design for what the stage would look like, and sort of was always just, honestly, it's not too far off from what it was like with Gary, where every day is kind of a different thing, a different creative task or challenge that I'm being given. And that led all the way up to actually shooting the Netflix special, which I had many different jobs on. Everything from, obviously doing the behind the scenes like photo and video capture, but then I was constantly getting like pulled into Video Village with the director and the director of photography, and sort of giving different thoughts on compositionally and how we needed to shoot things, to even sort of like co-directing alongside with our director Prashanth, and then sort of saw that all the way through. I directed the large majority of the post-production, so we have an editor, and then I was sitting next to that editor for 8 weeks or something like that, and I was in every single edit session, sort of helping craft the story. And then throughout the entire process, I didn't know what I was never given a real job title on the special, which is pretty natural with how my career's gone. I've always just sort of found a spot to be. And I remember Prashanth, our director, came into an edit session, and he was just like, "So do you know what you want your credit to be on this thing?" And I was like, "I have no idea." And he's like, "Yeah, you've kind of done everything." And he's like, "Do you want to be a producer?" And I didn't really know what a producer was, but I realized that's really what my job had been, was kind of creative problem solving throughout every step of the process. And so they ended up giving me a producer credit, which, from what I understand, with like my age and the project, it probably didn't make sense for me to get a producer credit because it was my first project of this scale. But being able to get that was really cool, and sort of fit in with what I had done for the previous year.
Yeah. So adding on to that, explain a little bit of the scale of the Netflix special, and like what went into, even you can talk about Hassan's side of it. Like, I know you went on tour, and I didn't understand until I watched the video that you released yesterday. I should put it linked down below just because it is a great look into your life. But like, he was practicing every single day for, you were on tour for how many days, how many cities?
I mean, the whole tour was over the course of a year. I think he performed the show 180 something times. And it started out, actually, we were going to these really small towns, and we were doing shows unannounced. He wants to essentially see how these stories are going to react to like different types of populations, because our country's so big. And so we started going like every weekend to these small towns, and we would only promote the show via like Facebook in that market. So it was really small crowds, and people really weren't aware that these shows were happening. And so we started testing the show there, and then we'd come back to New York, and then he'd go to the Comedy Cellar, stuff like that, always putting up time in these different stages and different rooms. And then we actually went on like the official tour, which kicked off in September of 2021. Kicked off in Miami, and it was a theater tour. So it was, for him, it was a big step up. It wasn't just comedy clubs and things like that. Everything was an actual theater show. And it needed to be that way because, unlike most comedy specials where you're just rolling up with like a microphone and the guy and like a stool, and he hops up on stage, there was a huge stage that went everywhere with us. And this is a different stage from what even the special was taped on. This was a totally different set that was specific for the tour. And so, we'd show up at this theater. There was a whole crew of people that have to like build that stage. He would do the show, break that stage down. It would get loaded onto a truck and shipped to the next city. And so, 180 shows, 150 something cities. It was pretty intense. It was just wild how crazy his work ethic is of testing material and getting everything so tight for the special. And even the Netflix special we cut down. So I think when he started testing the show in these small towns, the show was running an hour and a half. Sometimes it would push even to like close to 2 hours of him like going through all the material. And then he starts shaving all this time off over the year, to a point where whenever we went in to tape the special, it was like right at 80 minutes. And then we trimmed it down from 80 minutes to 68 minutes in the edit. So we even cut a bunch of stuff out of the performance on stage.
Yeah. How can you relate to his process of testing and trying new things and cutting it down? Because obviously all those events, all of the shows that you did, you were there shooting each night. Like, how do you refine the process going along all those days and ultimately get better and see improvements?
The thing that was weird was because there was a stage that traveled everywhere with us and the lighting was super consistent, I always made the joke to Hassan that I could pull any photo from any show and tell anyone it was any other show because they all looked, aside from him changing his outfit occasionally, they all looked the exact same. And so, you know, just a couple months into tour, I was like, I sort of don't know what to do, because everything was starting to look the same. And we, you know, we'd still go to these shows and then need to like deliver an Instagram carousel the next day. And so I started trying to kind of like explore just different side projects within the project. And so as an example, like I started doing this thing where I tried to photograph every pair of shoes he wore, because it's like he's a sneakerhead, so he would always wear different shoes. So I have like this whole like little mini photo series of just all the sneakers he wore at different shows and like different ways I could shoot just like his shoes. And then I went through this phase where I only shot like Polaroid film for like a month, because Polaroid films are really difficult to predict. You're just straight up gambling with Polaroid films. So there's actually this really fun story that we cut from the video that got put out yesterday, which I was really bummed because it was my favorite story, and so I think I might do like a deleted scenes episode just so I can tell this story on its own. But I started getting really into shooting instant film, and so over a couple months I started like collecting all these weird vintage Polaroid cameras and instant film cameras, and it was leading up to Radio City. Radio City was sort of like the biggest show of the tour. It definitely just felt like this moment that we hadn't experienced, because we were home. He sold out 5 shows at Radio City. There's only a couple comedians that have ever sold out 5 or more. And it's like Chappelle and John Mulaney. It's like these massive, massive people. Yeah. And one cool opportunity that you get whenever you shoot at Radio City is that they will let you onto the roof. And so Radio City has this iconic marquee, the Radio City Music Hall sign. Everyone sort of knows it. It's in every movie that takes place in New York. And so you get to go out onto the roof and actually shoot photos up there. And I decided to shoot basically everything in Polaroid film, which again, telling you that I'm gambling, it was a little bit of a scary experience. But we only had about 10 minutes up on the roof. And so I'm shooting all these Polaroid frames, and I don't even have time to let them develop, because it takes a few minutes, and I only had 10 minutes to shoot. So I shot like 5 or 6 packs of Polaroid film within this 10-minute span, and was just passing them off to an assistant the whole time. And I was just like, yo, just hold this, just keep it safe, not knowing anything I was getting. And then we were about to leave, and I was like, this was probably really reckless. And so I had like a small like point and shoot camera with me that was digital. And so I was like, hey, yo, just stand over here. And I shot 2 frames digital just so I had them. Yeah. Because I was so scared. I was like, what if none of these photos turn out? And then we went back downstage, and I'm just like, they had like given me this little room to set up all my gear, and I just had all the frames sitting out, and I'm just like slowly sitting there watching. And then the stress is starting to build, because I'm like, I'm probably never going to get an opportunity to shoot here again. Who knows if he'll perform here again, or another artist. Like, this was probably the only time I'm ever going to get this opportunity. And I'm sitting there just watching these frames develop. And like, a lot of them weren't good. Like, a lot of them were really bad. But those are the things that I was having to do. It was like, you had to find these ways of breaking patterns. Yeah. And so the takeaway is that I'm actually very happy I did that, because at Radio City, because of the scale of the show, there were dozens of other photographers that had come through, and like Radio City had a photographer. There were other photographers that are friends of Hassan. They wanted to come shoot the show. And so we had a bunch of people, and I knew, because I'd been shooting it for so long, I was like, all your photos are going to look the same. Yeah. I got to do something crazy. Yeah. And so shooting it on film, even though it was like really risky, I got these really dope photos that I know no one else has. The photos that I have, even if mine aren't the best, like they at least look different. Right. And so, you're constantly having to like play this game of like, what can you do differently? And once I kind of got into this groove, that's what I applied to like every show of the tour. It was like, okay, every time we went out to a new city, I tried to give myself some creative challenge to do something differently. And that's how I kind of like kept it alive for myself over the year.
Yeah. How was having that creative freedom to do that?
Really cool. Yeah. Like I got to give Hassan props there, because he was like, I believe in you. I believe in your work. Just do what you do.
Yeah.
And so from like the photo perspective, he was always just down to let me try whatever I wanted to.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So you worked for Gary. You went full time on yourself. You worked for Hassan. You lived on the East Coast. You lived on the West Coast. What has been the most special experience?
Oh man. The whole thing has been a fun ride. There's nothing in particular that stands out of like, this was the most special thing, because for me, the second I moved out of Florida and like had health insurance, everything else was like the cherry on top.
Yeah.
I get to be creative and like make videos and photos for a living. So whether I'm doing that on a huge scale or a smaller scale, or like it all feels the same. It's all the same level of excitement to me at this point.
Yeah. And similar question, only the opposite. You've been all over,
Mm-hmm.
What has been your biggest challenge?
I think my biggest challenge is generally getting out of my own way. So I think carry a lot of baggage from growing up in like this small town, where I remember my senior year of high school, right before I was going to leave, everyone's going around the class like saying where they're going to school and what they're going to do and what their plan is, and everyone had their shit really dialed. And I remembered like, it gets to me and my teacher's like, all right, so like what's next? Like, you're graduating, like what are you going to go do? And I was like, I don't know, I'm really into this magic thing. I like cameras. I think I could go to like New York or LA and just figure it out. And he looked at me and he's like, you should probably start getting pretty realistic with your life. And I was like, oh man. And I think like I carry so much of that with me even now, and the different successes I've had in my life. I still so often am just like, oh, is it all going to come crumbling down at any moment? And because of that, I have a bad habit of like holding myself small in a lot of situations. That's probably the biggest challenge for me to overcome.
How have you learned from that and like use that as a strength? Is there any way?
I think just like my own personal growth of, you start unpacking like, why are you feeling these way? You start unpacking like, why are you feeling this way? And when you do that, it just helps you get to know yourself better. And I think that's really the only thing I'm trying to do, is just fully understand who I am. Because I think a lot of people don't try and get to know themselves. They'll stay pretty like surface level with a lot of things. And because of these things that have affected my life both personally and professionally, learning to unpack them and like spend time with yourself and be quiet and just be like, okay, why am I feeling this way? How can I adjust? What can I do? It's helped in so much, and it's helped in so many ways. And even though I'm not perfect by any means, nor do I think I ever will be, I've certainly gotten better than what it was at its worst.
Yeah. So for anybody listening who like wants to start something new, whether it's try to get a big internship or get a new job or move cities, you've done that a lot, where you've kind of just changed your entire life chasing something. What's one piece of advice you'd give them?
The biggest piece of advice I can give to that, or really any other creative endeavor, get very organized with your life in every way. So how you're spending your time, where you're spending it, all the way down to the granular of like keeping your camera bag organized. It sounds crazy, but all of those things I've realized have saved so much time and allow my brain to only function on the things I'm best at. There's so many moments where like I always give people a hard time. No, I'm not throwing shade on anyone. But like I'll see my friends that have like really messy like desktops like on their computer, and I'm just like, yo, you don't know the pain you're causing yourself by doing this. So keeping everything really organized in like every aspect of your life that you can will save so much stress and thoughts and so many things that do not contribute to like good creative work. If you can do that, I think so many things become really, really easy.
Yeah. And you actually, I don't know if you personally told me or if I saw a video that you made, but it was you explaining your file storage and hard drives. I've done that ever since I saw your video. I've probably told dozens and dozens of people just because it just makes your life so much easier when you're editing a project.
Yeah, like every year I'll like post a link to it, and I'm just like, you're probably not managing your files well. Use this template.
Yeah, like right now I can probably go back and find the exact day that I learned that, just because everything's so organized.
And like, I think that you'll realize as time goes on, there's so many things you want to go back to. So like, you know, we've referenced this video that I put out yesterday a few times, which is basically, it was the year of me making everything from the tour and just sort of unpacking all of it. Don't get me wrong, it was a very hard video to make. I was editing for it almost 2 months, but at any moment I could go back and find exactly what I wanted when I needed to. And so it was never like, oh, there was this one clip and I knew we were in this one city. And it was like, I have a system where I can be like, oh, Atlanta, cool, that was February 2021. Here's the date, here's the reference. I can get to the file within like a minute.
Yeah.
And that means that instead of spending, you know, an hour trying to track something down, I can stay in flow the entire time.
Yeah.
And just keep sort of building the story.
Yeah. And to add to that, you tend to really be good at, like you said, this was like one of the first times you left your room, your apartment this year. And ever since I met you, you kind of seemed like that, where you're very good at just like getting away from everything else, but being creative and like locking yourself in a room, not being near your phone. How has that benefited you?
It's out of necessity, because I know myself well enough to know I'm very easily distracted. And so whenever I want to go into like deep work mode and like move the needle on things, I know that I have to eliminate everything. Meaning, I don't see my friends, I don't travel, I don't spend any time on social media. I will just like fully go into hermit mode and I like walk into my office and close the blinds and like just don't leave.
Yeah.
And I do that because I know that if I have a very like habitual personality of, you know, if I'm doing something every day and staying really disciplined, it's easy for me to maintain that pattern. But if I like take a day off or kind of chill, or I want to go on a trip or something, I'll crumble quickly and I will then like not work, you know, at all. So I have to stay really, really dialed on the distraction thing.
Awesome. So last question, what's next for Tyler Babin?
Who knows, man? I wish I did. You know, I've realized I'm not trying to growth hack this thing. Like, I'm cool with just letting everything move. And this isn't to say I don't have goals or ambitions. Like, I have very, very high, you know, goals and ambitions that I'm trying to accomplish. But I never have more than a month or two of an idea of what is coming. And I do that intentionally so that when spontaneous opportunities present themselves, I can take them. So, you know, I got a call literally just like 2 days ago that I'm going to go to LA and shoot this really cool project that I had no clue was going to happen. And because I've set my life up in a way where I can take these opportunities, I think that allows for moments where you have sort of slow growth and then there's these opportunities to make massive leaps. And that's how I want to approach everything for as long as I can in my career. So who knows what's next, but as long as it involves making more photos and videos, then I'm happy.